Hey everyone, it's Prasenjit Sahu, and today I'm talking about how to study for AP US history. Here's the thing, you're going to go into the first day of class, you're going to be sitting down, and your teacher's going to tell you you're going to have a great time. And then the next week, you're going to come into class, and you have absolutely no idea how to take good notes. So you're going to be copying down everything the teacher says. Then you're going to go home, and you're going to rewrite those notes, and you've done essentially double the amount of work for what you could have done in half the time. So what I want to do is I want to show you a three-step framework that helps make APUSH feel incredibly manageable, all right? Incredibly approachable, and something you can use to get ahead of your class, to get ahead of your peers, and to help you understand and soak up the knowledge like a sponge. So let's take a quick look. So anytime we have something to learn, I love to go through this three framework. It's resources, structure slash framework, and then connection. So let me talk through each of them. The first thing is we need to find the right resources. If we don't find the right resources, we're going to stray away from what we need to actually learn and how much of the content we actually need to know, right? Because we could go always very deep into all of these different aspects, but are they going to be tested completely in that level of depth? No. So we need to figure out what level of depth do we really need to know the information. The best way to do this is to go to the AP US History AP US History site and figure out, hey, what are the units that I need to learn? What are the time periods, so on and so forth, right? You can see AP US History doesn't start before 1491. So we need to figure out what happened at 1491 that made US history. And then it goes all the way to the present, right? So we can see all these different periods. Now, I want to make note of this that dates are really not that important, um, but context is really important. So understanding where and when stuff happened is really important. One other resource that I'm using right now is also the AP US history book, Five Steps to a Five. I love this textbook, and I think it was one of the fastest way for people to get a really good score, at least get a passing score, right? And I use this to study over the weekend before my AP exam, and I passed my exam because of this book. So imagine if you use this textbook right now, right? That's what I want to do. So these are primarily the two resources that you want to use. You'll also be probably using Khan Academy now, but I want to go through and explain how you can go through a textbook like this super fast, then go into class, understand the material, and walk out knowing 90%, scoring 90 to 100% on the test. So that was a little bit about resources. Now what I want to do is talk about structure and framework. So when we're learning, we need to really build this framework. We need to build a scaffolding or we need to build a house and then fill in the details, right? So here's the thing. When we talk about history, we talk about big ideas. We have big idea one, we have big idea two, they relate in some way, they go from one idea to another, right? Each idea is built on a set of concepts, right? And those concepts are built on a set of facts. Facts are like axioms. They're like the basic truths. For example, Christopher Columbus sailed in 1492 to what he thought was India, right? So this was his basic fact, right? Sailed in 1492, thought he was in India, right? But what is a concept? Concepts are basically bringing all those facts together and then having that big arching idea. So, for example, in our basic fact one, I said what he Christopher Columbus sailed the seas in 1492. All right, and then Christopher Columbus thought of going to India, right? The other way around. So basic concept one, Christopher Columbus finds the Americas in as he was trying to get to India. Right? So that's a really good concept one. And notice, even though I've written down the facts, right? What I really care about is getting this big idea scaffolding going on. All right. So we see an example of what is a fact, what is a concept, and what is this overall structure that we need. All right. we always want to start with framework, but why do we take notes, right? So we take the notes, we have this framework, we take notes to build connections. Okay, so what are these connections? Well, connections kind of explain why one idea fills into the next idea, why one concept, when you bring them all together, goes into the next concept. What we don't usually write is the facts, right? We don't write, oh, Christopher Columbus sailed the sea in 1492. We just remember that, right? If we write it down, it's kind of like telling our brains, hey, I'm going to refer back to you anyways, so don't memorize this. What we want to do is instead, we want to just like delete those from our notes. We want to focus on the concept and we want to be able to derive in our heads, can I go from this concept to these facts, right? And then can I go from this concept, bring in other concepts, and get to the big idea? That's how we want to really study for AP US history. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to showcase how this works with a chapter. So I've taken the first chapter of content from the 5 steps to a 5. So I'm going to get rid of this now. And that was chapter 6. So you can see that we're like literally following along with the AP curriculum. We have 1491 and 1607, and that's chapter 6 in this textbook, which is settling in the Western Hemisphere. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to like break down what's in this chapter, right? You don't always want to just quickly dive into reading, right? If you don't have a plan, you're not going to be strategic about how you're going to read this. So what I want to do is I want to take a second and notice, okay, build that structure once again. So I'm going to build that structure, and to do that, I'm just going to notice what my eyes hover over, right? So first thing I notice is, okay, I have a little bit of a title. I have a couple like dates, right? This is the time period. Here's what's going to happen in this chapter: summary, key concepts, keywords, right? Then we have like subheadings, titles, right? We've got Native Americans, Columbus, section paragraphs, and then paragraphs, so on and so forth. Again, it happens in this section as well. And then last but not least, at the end, we have this rapid review, this chapter review with a rapid review and a timeline. So when I'm constructing my structure for this chapter, right, it's literally just one chapter. To get the most out of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build that structure first. What does that structure look like? Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this timeline. Okay, timelines are really good because it's somebody else's structure. This is what they see as the time period and what events had unfolded. But remember, your structure doesn't necessarily have to be a timeline. Timelines are great at anchoring things at certain points, but they don't give you this conceptual connection ability, right? Ability to connect concepts together. So that's why timelines is a little bit of a limiting structure. So what I want to do is I want to use timelines to help me understand what's going on. Use timelines to help me understand what's going on. But what I'm going to do instead is try to use a timeline, build a concept map instead, and then try to fill it. Try to build a timeline, fill it in with big ideas, then fill in those big ideas with concepts. And then obviously the facts are stuff I'm just going to be reading and remembering, right? Same idea with the rapid review. Here you can see the rapid review is basically telling us here are the big key ideas from the text that we need to be paying attention to. Okay? So go ahead and take a pause now and read over that. All right. So moving forward, what does that look like? Okay, I've taken the time to actually make this timeline real quick. Now, does this mean you need to make the timeline every single time? No, right? I'm just showcasing what I think the first time as you're learning this skill, what it looks like. So we've got 2,500 Asians go to Americas, right? Now remember, do we really care about this? No, because our time period is 1491. We've just put it in there for the sake of understanding big ideas. Then we've got let me get rid of those. Then we got 1490 to 1550. All right, so that's close, but not exactly our time period. So let's just change that to 1490 to 1550. This is kind of like what we understood after a little bit of in-depth understanding. And then we had this later period of what? 1550 to 1605, 1607. Okay, so we have this like Okay, we understand what the timeline is. Okay, what are the big ideas? Okay, so the big ideas are basically Columbus finding America, Cortez finding I believe modern day the Aztecs and the Mayans. So these are really big ideas. These are things we need to pay attention to. So one other thing I wanted you to notice is look at how much writing do I have. I barely have any writing in this because all the information should be stuck in our heads. Once they're stuck in our heads, that way we don't forget them, right? We should be able to drive them conceptually over and over and over again. That's what helps us understand the materials. If we just remember facts as if facts and concepts like fragmented pieces of knowledge, then we're not going to be able to remember them as well. And we're going to require ourselves to look at the information over and over and over again. That's not what we want. We want to be able to read it once, put it in some sort of mental model, and just remember it. Okay, so let's move forward. I'm going to start reading this, and I'm going to say, so just to clarify, this section right here was basically built out of the rapid review and the timeline. All right, so I've looked through this. I see that these are some big ideas listed down in the chapter. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Okay, so obviously, where am I going to start? I'm going to start with the summary. Okay, this kind of reinforces if I have the right big idea. Okay, big ideas. There are several reasons why Europeans became interested in the Americas of this period. Economic, political, religious factors are the most important. Spanish originally viewed the Americas as a barrier to the direct route of the Indies. However, soon they developed a large empire in South and Central America and viewed the region as potential source for tremendous wealth. Some Native American tribes have developed complex civilizations in the years before the Europeans arrived, and the ecosystem of the Americas was drastically altered by the arrival of the Europeans. So hopefully you were if you didn't understand what we just read, take a second now to like read through it at your own pace and understand what has been written here. But basically all I see in this is basically is this idea. So I'm going to take a text box. I'm going to say Europeans, right? They're traveling to Americas, uh, and then they built their empire, right? So this is literally like the biggest aspect of this um, concept, right? So we have Europeans going to Americas. Okay, key concept. Again, now we have another key concept. Okay, on the North American continent, contact among people of European Americans and West Africans created the New World. Okay, so the New World was what? This connection between Europeans, Americans, and West Africa. Okay, so I'm just going to put in West Africa because it seems pretty prevalent in what they're going to talk about. Remember, our structure, right? Our structure here with their big ideas can be changing left and right. Okay, so here's this, and I'm going to bring another one here, and then I'm going to do this, right? So basically, if you go in both directions, they're all building this new world. Okay, so this idea of a new world, Europeans going to Americas, they're expanding their world essentially. Okay, keyword Columbian exchange, exchange of crops and animals, disease, ideas between Europe and its colonies of the Western Hemisphere that developed in the aftermath of the voyages of Columbus. Okay, so Europeans are going to the Americas and then going back around. Actually, um, they have this idea of the Columbian exchange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like build this double arrow right here. And I'm going to add text in here. Columbian exchange. Cool. Does that make sense? I hope so. Because now we've just taken this, we've gotten a very good structure under our belts to understand what is going to happen moving forward. All right. At this time, I'm going to take a look at this and I'm going to see, okay, anything that I want to. So these are big ideas, right? So we have Europeans coming over to America. Anything that fits this already, I want to take a look at right now. Okay, so we had, remember, the Columbian Exchange. What was that? That was basically bringing in ideas, knowledge, disease, right? Those are also big parts. So I'm going to say, okay, so Columbian exchange is like, yes, it's between European and Americas, but it's also a topic on itself. So I'm going to say Columbian exchange like this. We know where it fits, so I'm just gonna put it to the side right now. Right here, I'm gonna bring this down. I'm sure the Europeans brought more than smallpox, so we might just be adding in a couple more facts, right? So smallpox is a pretty big fact um, that was brought over from this period. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right things, so I'm just gonna check here. Yeah. So notice that like uh, they brought diseases from Europe and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is a very big fact, and you'll see it in the timeline. Actually, that's where I got it from. Um, but it's not necessarily a concept on its own. The concept is Columbian exchange. Does that make sense? Here's the difference between a fact and a concept. A fact and a concept. All right. Okay. All right. Any other things? Okay. So desires and their economic issues in Europe led them to America. Okay, great. So I'm just gonna place this right before here. Okay, I'm gonna say Europeans, right? So Europeans voyage, if I can spell, onto the what? The Americas, right? So notice how we are adding on to our structure. Okay. Now, is this timeline based? No, this is literally just basing it off of concepts. Okay. All right, let's keep moving forward. So we've got conquistadors devastate the Native Americans. We're not really. I'm sure that we can see that in this, but I'm not going to put that in yet. But we'll come back to it for sure. Columbian exchange between the West and Europe. Okay, well, we kind of just had that already here, right? America to Columbus, Columbus to Americas. We're gonna read about that, so I'm gonna wait to put that on there. And then we've got Spanish explorers, Southwest United States. I'm gonna wait to do that. Again, Columbus to Americas, and then Hernando Cortez had his own adventure, so that goes here. And then we have Americas here. So notice how we just took every single big concept that was right here and in the timeline, right? We didn't care much for the timeline, right? We have it in our brains now. It's like, okay, 1492 to 1607. Knowing those time periods is going to be really, really crucial. And knowing how to transition from one time period to the next is also going to be really crucial. All right. So being able to have that skill is necessary for your success in this class. All right. So we read the key concept, we read the summary, we read the keywords. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a second to read, let's say, the first paragraph of Native America. All right. If we can, we'll try to find a couple facts, right? And how those facts lead to a concept. All right. So that's what you want to be doing, especially in class. Your class, you're going to have facts and concepts that are told to you in class. If your teacher is nice enough to give you the big ideas, that's wonderful. But most of the times, what's going to happen is he's going to tell you a series of details of an event. Then you have to figure out what is the point of that event, and you're going to have to figure out what is the big concepts behind that event, behind preceding that event, happening after that event, and so on. So let's just take a second now to read paragraph 1 of the Native Americans, and we'll move forward from there. Take that time now. So I've taken the time now to read. We've taken the time now to read, and basically what we see is, there are a couple facts. The biggest facts is, hey, we have this Aztec civilization and we have the Incas, right? And then people living there have different levels of social complexity. We have people who are like living in villages. They have maybe even hunter-gatherer groups, right? Versus people who are in that Aztec and Inca empire, and they're having the city-based empires. They're starting to build big cities. So this is like, I would say this right here is kind of like a concept. The Europeans found socially complex uh, and diverse groups of people. All right, so take a second now to read part 2, paragraph 2. All right, so we've just come back from reading this paragraph, and what we notice is, hey, the big idea is actually written in the last sentence right here. Sometimes it's in the topic sentence, sometimes it's in that conclusion sentence right at the bottom. So here we see the Native American people were divided into many distinctive tribal groupings. So when Europeans came over, they were like, oh, all these Indians look the same, so they might like group them all together. But that's not necessarily the importance or maybe that's an assumption I'm making, but that's not really what's going on, right? There were many distinctive tribal groups. One we talked about was the Mississippian culture, right? Then we talked about the great city in Illinois. We also talked about what the settlers. Oh, the settlers first um, collectively met with the woodland Indians. These were the English settlers of the time, right? So you can see, and then Algonquins and Iroquois. So if you've ever looked into U.S. history, these are kind of like important people, right? Important tribes. But what are we going to take from this? The biggest idea, the biggest concept here is that Native American people were distinct and had different distinctive groups, right? And that makes complete sense. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to add that into our map. All right. So we've got, where is our map? Yeah, so make sure you're able to find your map. So bring your maps closer as well to where you're reading. Okay, so I'll bring this here. Okay, so we have Americas, right? And in the Americas, we have these different Native Americans. Okay, so big idea was Native Americans. The most recent concept we had, Native Americans, what were found to be divided among groups. Yeah, so divided. So they were in distinct. This DINCT, distinct groups. Sometimes when you're writing out notes like this, it's really good way to make sure that your spelling is correct. If you have Grammarly already on board, get rid of it because it's not going to help you learn the appropriate grammar and writing skills that you need, especially for DBQs and LEQs and all these different things, SAQs for AP U.S. history. And a lot of people struggle with actually good writing, and that's what tanks their score. I know it did for mine. So I want to make sure that you guys don't have to worry about that. So get rid of Grammarly, learn the actual grammar. All right. So coming back, we see Native Americans in distinct groups. What was the other one? The other one was again this social complexity, right? So Native Americans, they're in distinctive groups, but they're also Native Americans have diverse social complexity. Okay. And notice that like how I have 3 lines in this. And for me, that's a signal that this is enough, right? I don't want to keep trying to max it out. I only go more than 3 lines if I need to, right? I only try to stick to 2 or 3 lines. And I don't even change the shape of this, right? That's how I get everything to be so standardized. Like I don't change the shape of this, I just keep it the same size. So we know that these are the biggest aspects of Native Americans in this time period. Okay. So these, and then obviously you had your facts, right? So we highlighted a lot of these facts. So like the Mississippi, woodland Indians, and all these, and then Incas, Aztecs. But do we really need to write down every single fact? No, because those facts are stuff that stays in your head. You're supposed to have those remembered. You should be able to say, okay, if I tell you, like let's say a week from now, Native Americans were in distinct groups. You should be able to tell me, hey, yeah, we had the Mississippian people, and their culture. We had the Iroquois, the Algonquins, aka the Woodland Indians. Then you had all these different separate, distinct groups of Native Americans in North America at the time. And if I say, okay, Native Americans have diverse social complexity, you should be able to tell me, hey, Native Americans at the time, they had either like city states, they had multiple different things, and they have Incas, Aztecs. They were hunter gatherers, right? So then, what I'm going to take a second to do is I'm going to take this second to actually like, hey, this is a concept. This is a big idea right here, okay? And what I can say is, how did so obviously this section is titled Native America. We can title it the same thing, but like we can see a better naming structure for this, and I would say that would be Native. Oh, uh, Native America. America's current state. State before Native America before settlers. Right? Basically, how they found them. So these are like the 2 ideas that build into that. Okay, so this is our big map right here. I'm going to take a second. We're going to focus on building it into the big map a little bit later. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have um, this right here. Okay. Sometimes you'll notice, and maybe I'm going to do this right now actually, this is actually a really good moment to talk about a section. Okay. A section is basically, it basically houses ideas together, right? It houses concepts together, so on and so forth, so that you can move from that concept into another like group. Here's the thing: a lot of these things are like phenomenons. So, for example, um, we talked about Columbian Exchange. That's a set of things that happened that led to this phenomenon. So let me give you a clearer example. For example, um, in World War II, right after World War II, they had this World War One. They had this thing called the Treaty of Versailles, right? Treaty of Versailles led to a lot of different impacts, but those impacts can be grouped into one, two, three categories, right? And the reason we call them phenomenons is because when you're living in history during that time period, you don't know that these are going to be the outcomes of this consequence, right? Of this action. But when you look back at history, we can say, okay, this period is called the Treaty of Versailles consequence period. And then this period is like when Germany didn't pay back for reparations, right? So these are like phenomenons that happen afterwards. So in this time, in this section, what I want to do is I want to say, this is what Native America was like before the settlers. And for the sake of our for demonstrations today, I'm going to make them very simple. I'll just point them towards one direction. Cool? Cool. Okay, so now we are building this concept map, right? So we can see that, hey, like we barely have any dates now that we're thinking about it, right? We don't have too many dates. We have a couple years here and there, but we have big ideas that are leading to one idea to the next. And you might be asking, hey, isn't this just like critical reading right here? Just making sure we can read and understand? Yes, this is exactly right. Because most of the structures in of writing in like history is gonna follow this idea of like, okay, I have a claim, right? I have a claim, and then I have supporting evidence, supporting details, evidence, whatever, right? Examples, and how they do that is like examples, data, structures, figures, whatever. And then last but not least, we're gonna go have this conclusion aspect. Okay, so we've got conclusions and whatnot. Sometimes they won't immediately tell you the claim. Like for example, in this second paragraph, they don't tell you what the claim is. Right? We figure out what the claim is with our conclusion. Oh, the Native American people were divided into distinctive tribal groups, right? So that's kind of like our conclusion is kind of like a restatement of the claim. Maybe adding on a couple bits more here or there, right? So understanding this is really vital because it will help you get through the material really fast. All right. If we have that structure, we can see it happening over and over again. Okay. I want you this time when you're reading, I want you to find that pattern actually. That way you can try to finish reading super fast and get what you really need out of this, and not spend over an absurd amount of time reading through the content. All right. So let's take a look. Um, I'll let you read through this right now. So if you just read this paragraph, you'll notice that there's a lot of like moving parts in this, right? It says basically what I would say is like it goes X goes to Y, which goes to Z, which leads to like A, for example, right? And it just keeps going and going and going, which is a great thing. We need to just figure out what are the really important parts of this. So we've got what was the first half of this? This was okay, scientific knowledge. So like I would say the Renaissance. So I'll just grab the Renaissance, right? Renewed their interest in science. Okay, then we have this idea of religion, right? Religion is really important, but now there's like this aspect of religious conflict, right? So then they talk about like religion and how the scientific aspects were made, right? So we have like the astrolabe, and then you had the Reformation with the Crusades. So Crusades allowed us in this case Europeans to go back into the East for spices and other Asian goods. That's what they wanted from Asia, right? But they were stopped by Islamic power. So if I were to just draw this out, right, I would say, okay, Europe, right? Europe is here, okay, they want to go to they want to trade with Asia, okay, for their spices and other goods, right? So usually textiles and whatnot. But they're being stopped by Islamic powers at the time. Okay, so then this makes Europe check out the rest of the world. Like, can we go the other way, right? Or will people just fall off the map? So then they try to find Asia this way, but they don't. They find America, right? So we, in our minds, this is literally what I have in my mind as I'm thinking through this, as I'm reading through this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let me just convert this into like a map, like a structure. Okay, so it's this is a whole concept in itself, right? So there were a couple concepts that we talked about, right? There are a lot of facts, astrolabe, crusades, whatever, but we have this idea of scientific revolution. Okay, we also have this idea of religious religion uprise. Um, what's another word I could use? Reformation, Catholic Reformation, religious upheaval. We can use their words, or we can just say rising of religion. Right? Whatever works for us. And then this leads to, like, and then there were some economic issues, right? So we've got what Europe wanting to uh trade. Okay, so wants to trade with Asia. Okay, so we notice what are the facts. The facts are like, the astrolabe, the Portuguese, all these things. Here are the big ideas: scientific revolution, right? They're becoming more methodical, okay, and wanting to change their environments. If you read that here, right? So they said, um, exciting experimental approach to the acquisition of knowledge about the natural environment, and with more knowledge came the power to begin to alter that environment. Okay, so uh, gives them more power. Let's just say that more power. Okay, we've got rising of religion, right? So being able to expand, but also led to religious conflicts, right? So these are concepts here. Do you get that? And then last but not least, Europe wants to trade with Asia. Okay, I'm going to just say blocked by Islamic powers, which leads them to what? Find other routes to Asia. Okay, so these three things is what led Europe. These are the three things that led Europe to voyage onto the Americas. So we can probably see where this leads us in our big picture. Okay, so that's gonna, like, these three are gonna, like, flow into this idea of desires and issues in Europe led to the voyage of Americas. Okay, so I hope you can understand how we've figured out concepts and how we've determined facts from this section of the reading. Notice that there are a lot more concepts just baked into one paragraph, right? Previously, we saw that each paragraph had like one idea, one claim, and then like it expanded upon that claim. In this one, we have multiple different concepts because it's explaining a story. I want you to think of this as a story. Here are the things that happened. Here's what it led to. Here's what happened afterwards, right? When we see it as a story, like here's X goes to Y goes to Z, then it's really easy for us to remember what is going on. And that is like a really good benefit and ease, like benefit of just learning history in general. I'm going to delete this X to Y to Z. I guess not delete, but I'm going to lessen the size. Okay. And then we see how everything was presented. Okay. And then now we're going to take the time to actually go ahead and read to the next couple paragraphs. So go ahead and read the following. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'll read the first sentence here. That way you can like read the next. In this period, so Columbus, in this period, expanding intellectual horizons, many Europeans were looking beyond their traditional boundaries to the wider world. And then Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, sponsored voyages of discovery to the Azores in the Atlantic and along the coast of Africa in mid 1400s. All right, so go ahead and keep reading, and we'll talk about it later on. This time, let's take a little bit more. Um, let's make it a little bit more challenging. We're going to go ahead and read these three paragraphs all at once. All right, go for it. Okay, so welcome back. If you got a chance to read that, that's great. But now what we'll be doing is going through it. So we obviously got a lot more facts, right? So we got this idea of like, oh, Europe's exploring, right? So we got this idea of the Portuguese, and then we learned about a little bit of that story, right, from Christopher Columbus. He went to the Portuguese. He didn't get funding. He didn't get funding, and then you know what happened? He goes to Spain, and they kind of like believed in his vision. They called him a like they didn't call him, but they said persuasive visionary in the text, something like Steve Jobs. And then he sails. He reaches it in 1492. Um, So that was a little bit about Columbus. And another really important explorer we learned about was Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama was the first person to succeed in opening a direct link between Europe and the Asian market. So sometimes there are these facts that won't be expanded upon later on. So they're kind of important to know, not really, but they are like they keep the perks of general knowledge. So I'm not gonna write this down because it's not really important to U.S. history, but this is really important to just know as a general point of knowledge. All right, so let's keep going. So we've learned about Christopher Columbus. We know Portuguese were big. We know now that the Spanish were big, right? So we've got these two people, okay, two players, right? He claimed and then we learn a little bit about Columbus and how like their mindset was, right? So Columbus did this for Spain, and he believed that he was supposed to be like everyone there is supposed to be subjects of the king and the queen, which honestly doesn't make sense, right? Like if you just get to the land and you see people are already living there, do you think you can just colonize them? That doesn't make sense, right? But this is history, right? We don't get to um, we only learn about the history, right? And we learn from the history. So this is what happened. There's an encomienda. So this is a little hard, but if you don't know how to pronounce words, just look them up, search them up, try to figure it out, right? So I noticed out that like some words here might be a little bit difficult to the first time readers, or like to first time readers, or like just advanced versions of definitions. We have diaspora and epic. So go ahead and take a second to like search up what those mean, right? Because you'll see them here and there, and if you can use them in your writing, next level writing. Okay, so here we have the economia ecom system was forced into the Native Americans, and so that was a really really brutal system, it seems. And then we have died of diseases. We have the Columbian Exchange, so we have that idea again. And then last but not least, we have the fact that Native Americans, because they died from diseases, there's not really a lot of labor. So then African slaves were sold to colonists. So I guess there is something to say about this, and like how it's okay for like people to be enslaved, especially in a religion like Christianity. But I think that's another discussion for another day. Yet this is what happened in history. Cool. Let's go ahead and take a second to see what that looks like in our map. Okay, so we have a bunch of things. We'll say, okay, here are key players. So I'm going to get my rectangle out. And for those of you who are wondering what software I'm using, it's called Whimsical. It gives you like a free amount of mind maps you can make, and it's really useful and easy to use too. So I would definitely recommend it for mind mapping, or actually in this case, what we're calling as concept mapping. So let's move forward with this. So we've got Portugal and Spain are big players in exploration. Okay, so that's a good example. Then we have Columbus sailed to what? Sails to Americas, or to his India. Okay, I'll say his India. I like that. His India in 1492, and this is like the one of those years that you definitely should know, and it's also again that general knowledge idea. Okay, and then we have this idea that like, oh, Native Americans are lowly servants, let's say, lowly servants of the Spanish kingdom. That's Spanish kingdom. And last but not least, we have Native Americans. And sometimes what we need is like, if you keep writing Native Americans, we can sometimes shorten it out, right? That way we can get more information in. So we've got Native Americans, and that leads to labor shortage, right? So there's like a shortage of Native Americans, leads to Africans, African slaves being sold, right? So these are like the big three concepts that we got from this, right? Um, yeah, hopefully that makes sense, and you can see where we come to understand this essentially. It's not like I'm pulling it out of thin air, right? We're understanding all this now. Okay, so we're now at the end of our chapter one, chapter six, period one. The last couple paragraphs we have is Cortez in Mexico. So go ahead and take a second to read through those. We're gonna uh, read through them, and then we're gonna try to get our big ideas, and then we're gonna try to connect them into our big map, right? And that's kind of like what we want. We want to be able to derive these ideas as much as possible, so that you can mentally go through them over and over. Like you're literally walking down the street. Oh, let me just quickly review what is period one about, and you should be able to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and take a read. All right, so here's Cortez in Mexico, part one. Okay, pause now, and then on the other page is the end of that paragraph. Okay, so you can pause here too. Okay, wonderful. So now we're back, and we've taken the time to read through Cortez in Mexico. But my highlights, they're like just the facts to get the story moving. So you want to be able to again remember those in your head, like, oh, Columbus was finding gold, and he was like, oh, I want to get more of this precious metal, right? So okay, there's this search for gold, right? This really important search for gold and immeasurable wealth. So wealth, right? Then we have this idea of this guy named Cortez, right? So Hernando Cortez. Okay, so Hernando Cortez, he's considered arguably um, great in one way, but not in another. He was one of the first and the greatest of Peru, of the Spanish conquistadors, to overthrow these native states. So obviously, like what he did was probably really wrong. Um, Not probably, pretty wrong. Um, and obviously, some would argue because of like the sacrificial nature of these places. But you know, again, I'm one to learn history right now. I guess I'm not one to judge right at this moment, especially when I'm trying to figure out what we're supposed to know for like the test. All right. So Hernando Cortez, first and greatest. I'll just write that down. First and greatest Spanish conquistadors. Conquistador. Okay. So now you see, oh, we've spent a little bit too much. Okay. So I'll just say greatest like this. Spanish conquistador. Okay. Cortez. I'll just go first and greatest Spanish conquistador. Okay. So the reason I changed it out that way is because I really want to be able to like quickly read and move forward from it, right? So I don't want to be like sitting first and greatest. Our brains, like when we see like something super big, right, and we are not able to chunk it up, it doesn't want to read. Have you ever wanted to read a one whole big like block of text? No, it's not appetizing to read. It's better to read like smaller ideas and then see how they build upon each other. Okay, so these are our next couple ideas. We've got this search for gold, um, sends it back to Spain, right? So and then he sends it back to Spain, um, and he has this fallout. So Hernando Cortez, um, I'll say fallout with the Aztecs. So just so we know that, oh, it's not Christopher Columbus. That's with the Aztecs. It's Hernando Cortez with the Aztecs. Okay. So now let's see how this would fit into our big map. Okay, so this was our kind of like a big map. Okay, we've got Columbian Exchange, we've got Americas on this side, we've got West Africa, we've got Europeans voyage onto Americas, we've got desires and economic issues in Europe. Okay, so I'm going to start connecting a lot of these ideas, right? And I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary here. So we're just like connecting based on what we know um, about this these individuals, individual concepts and ideas and how they flow. All right. Oops. It does help if you line them up, and that way, like, it'll all line up really nicely for you when you need to. So I love using these guidelines right here. So if you notice, you can say, oh, let me just put them all to one size, right? And then I can center it, or I can like center it vertically, right? So there are all these different aspects you can do. So let's see. And then we have that, and then we have, so these three add into desires for economic issues in Europe, desires and economic, and let me just do and. Sometimes I like using the plus, but I'm going to use and right now, like this. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. Okay, so we have Native Americans. So this is what was happening at the time, right? So I'm going to actually, what I'm going to do is say, okay, this is kind of leads to the, this is uh what it looks like, what it before settlers. Okay, so we have that. Okay, so I'm going to say, instead of Native America, I'm just going to say before exploration. If I look back at it and I say Native America, oh, I'm thinking of Native Americans, but I'm not thinking of like what was America like before exploration. You can think of this, like you can even write that question down. It's actually a real good question. What was America like? What was what were the Americas, right? Like before exploration. What a great question. So you can add in those types of questions, right? So that will help your understanding of the knowledge. So we had this idea of Columbian exchange, right? So we have this idea of Columbian exchange, and on top of that, we can add in a couple more aspects to the Columbian exchange. So I'm going to bring this around because I want to have the Columbian exchange a little bit in the middle, like how we have it here. I'm going to simplify these. All right, so we were moving forward and we had these like different desires, right? So just now I'm just trying to fix this line section up so that we can make it look nice and organized. Right? These are the tools, the skills you want to have when you're using this platform. Perfect. So now we can see how like these two things kind of lead us to understand what was America like before exploration. Then we have this idea of Columbian exchange, right? So we had this idea of Columbian exchange. We're gonna connect here, right? So notice in this platform, what you want to notice is that you want to get in close enough where you see the boxes highlighted and you've got the center of that box. That way you know you've hit the center of the section. So Columbian Exchange, we see Columbian Exchange here. We can delete it if we want. I like it right now, so we're going to keep it there for a second. But we definitely could delete it later on. It's all, again, up to personal preference at that point. Okay. I'm going to move this over a little bit because I want there to be space. Yeah, there we go. And then smallpox, Native Americans, right? What else do we have? We had a couple other ideas here. So we had, remember, we had, where is it? Yes, uh, African slaves are being sold. That was a kind of an idea leading to what? Columbian Exchange. That was a part of the Columbian Exchange, right? Um, right. So I'm just going to clarify, just wanting to make sure. Um, okay, I guess not necessarily. So Western Hemisphere, European, and the colonies of the Western. So I guess okay, I stand corrected. It's not necessarily like something about European exchange, but it is something about West Africa. So I'm going to put this right here next to West Africa because we see that immediately there. Okay, and how West Africa is related to that. So just to clarify, again, the Columbian exchange is between European and Americas, and we can change that once we see more evidence that it's related to West Africa. I just don't want to add in, build your mental structure in a different way, um, so that like it really confounds your understanding. Okay, so this confuses your understanding. So we've added these elements in. Now we're going to add in these last bits. Okay, so how do we add them in? That's the real question, right? And this is where the real learning happens. You're like evaluating what information you know, how they fit in together. That is learning. That is where you're forcing your brain to create those connections in your head. So let's take a look. So we have Portugal and Spain are big players in exploration. So yeah, so we have these two big elements. How are we gonna fit this in? This is where real learning happens. Let me think. So we've got Europeans voyage onto the Americas. Okay, so we've got this is kind of like this feeds into this idea. Let me break this for a second. Um, I'm gonna say both of these kind of relate to this. Okay, and then I'm gonna have. I guess I'll just connect it like this. It's a little messy. I agree, but does it work for you? That's my question. If it works for you, then however it's presented doesn't really matter. I'm gonna actually put this like I do yeah like this. Okay, so we can see that Portugal is our big player. That leads to Columbus sailing to in 1492. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna say, um, this leads to. I'm gonna switch this arrow and say Europeans are deciding to voyage. That leads to Portugal and Spain being big players. Columbus goes to Portugal, doesn't get it, goes to Spain, gets it, reaches Americas in 1492. You can see how that makes sense now. Okay, so and I don't have to really loop it back in, but like this is an idea that comes out of this European big idea, right? Europeans going on a voyage. So then we have Native Americans are lowly servants of the Spanish kingdom. Okay, so they are considered lowly servants of the Spanish kingdom. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, Columbus sails to the Americas in 1492. So that means after that we have him thinking, oh, they're lowly servants of the Spanish kingdom. Okay, and then we'll have this idea of okay, um, big players of exploration, right? They're searching for what? Golden wealth. Hernando Cortez now becomes one of the greatest conquistadors. He's also the first one, and he has a fallout with the Aztecs. Okay, so good things to know. And we've built out a whole map. All right, so let's just quickly review, and that way you'll be able to see how this map is really helpful for you to understand materials in um, AP U.S. history. Last but not least, one other thing I want to do is you should be adding a little bit of color. You can see I put in an emoji here. I put in a couple dates here. You should definitely put in a couple bits of color as you can see fit, right? What I like to do is I like to use colors to show the direction of flow. So my first direction of flow is, hey, this is a really big idea. So I like to put like green here, okay? Then I say, okay, here it leads to what does it lead to? Okay, so this leads to, and I'm gonna make it green. Or I don't even have to make this like any other color, but like we can make this green. We can show that this is an exchange. It's like going between two things, so it's like green as well. Okay, and then we have this like movement between Europeans, Americas, West Africa. Okay, um, then we can just pull out like big points. Okay, so we can say, um, what were some big points? Okay, so we can see that this is Native America before exploration. Um, What else? Desires, economic Europe. So in your head, in my head, so what I'm thinking is, okay, when I look at this again, I should be able to immediately say, hey, we're looking at the exchanges that's occurring and what occurred between Europe, West Africa, and Americas. We know that Europe wanted to voyage. Like, why did they do this? Because they had some desires, specifically religious and scientific, right? And geographical, I guess you could say. Desires to look outwards, and then also they had some like conflicts with um, not being able to trade from Europe straight to Asia because they were blocked by Islamic power. So I should be able to derive this set of concepts from there. Then we have this idea that Europeans are going on to voyage. So who were the big players? They were Portugal and Spain. Okay, they were looking for gold and wealth. Columbus. So well, they were looking for trade. So I would say searching for trade routes to search for trade routes to Spain, no, to India, right? And then it turned into what? Search for gold and immeasurable wealth, right? And we have this idea from Hernando Cortez, and we have this fallout from the Aztecs, and then um, definitely want to show this as a big idea because they even pointed out how big it was that Columbus sails and sets foot into the Americas. It changed literally the history of this continent. On top of that, we have Native Americans are slowly, yeah. So this is like a really bad aspect, and for me, I'd be like, oh, that's pretty disgusting in my own opinion. And greatest here for me is also pretty disgusting because of what he did, and that's just my personal take. Adding in emotions is really helpful for you to remember these aspects of of the culture. So then we've got that, we've got that, we've got that. So you can see like, okay, I have some level of like understanding of where things flow, right? So there's a conceptual connection here. Then I have elements that I love, I think is great or like really important. And then stuff I really don't like, right? We can add that emotion in because that's like important to us. One more thing I'm going to point out is there is this icon section here. So let me see. Okay, icons. And I like to grab a star. Okay. So we can just grab a quick star right here. Oh, which star should we use? Let's just use this. Okay. So here's a star. Okay. And let's say our teacher, like we get into class, we talk about all these different things. It's super cool. Like, oh yeah, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. Okay. Oh, you definitely will be tested on which disease was transferred through the Columbian Exchange. So I'm just going to make sure that I have that written down. Hey, smallpox to the Native Americans through Columbian Exchange. So that way, I'm also being like making sure that I have the right information for class as well. You know, if you go on Khan Academy, this gave us a great scaffolding. Okay, right now, if you read Khan Academy, it's going to tell you about the northwest, I believe the southwest side of the Native Americans, the west side of the Native Americans, the Texas, Florida, what's going on there in the Native Americas. But here's the thing: when we look at this review book, right, and we look at how much of the test really matters, it's like 4%, 4 to 6% of this entire test is Unit One. So do we really, really, really need to know so much detail about Native Americans? No, but it would be nice to know, right? But we don't care about nice to knows here. We care about what is necessary, get our results, and then we move forward with it. Okay. So in the in our AP review book, we know that this is what was stated as important aspects to know about Native Americans. Now, again, this is a scaffolding. Okay, you can build from here. And you can talk about okay, northwest, southwest, whatever for the Native Americans, and use this as a template, right, to talk about those things in this regard, because that's what's going to be tested on. So this is how you use this review book, 5 Steps to a 5, and any other like resources like Heimler's videos and Khan Academy to help you get a really good score on this exam. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments below, and I look forward to hearing more about your struggles, your successes on using this method. Thank you. And if you like what you saw here and want more, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm planning on doing a couple more if we get enough likes on this video. Let's hit at least 100 likes and we can do another chapter of this textbook.